Chapter 8, A Second Chance. Guess what? I burst out from the back seat where I was sitting with Butch. I told them about the Tennessee Scout and then added, and Coach said they have big plans for me next year. I'd already begun to imagine next year's crowd roaring like the fans had that night. I expected my family to be as fired up as I was, but my brother's response wasn't anything close to the delight I felt inside. I don't know, Rashad, Brian said hesitantly, as if they had already discussed it. Butch added, hasn't that coach been telling you that you were too fat and too slow the whole season? The imaginary fans I pictured cheering me on suddenly fell silent. Nodding my head, I felt completely disoriented by the turn in the conversation. I thought they'd be as excited as I am. Why aren't they? They'd seen me play. Didn't they realize that this is exactly what I'd been dreaming of? I hadn't been aware that Butch and Brian had reservations about the whole Jefferson Forest situation. My success on the field that night apparently only reinforced their concerns. On top of that, they recognized that because of my poor grades, I wasn't on track to make it to college. Both of them knew I needed a fresh start. I also didn't know when I hopped into the car with my mom and brothers that Butch and Brian had spent the whole game talking amongst themselves about the need to transfer me to Lynchburg Christian Academy, where they both were coaching. As we drove home, Butch suggested the possibility of me attending LCA. I didn't even know where the school was, and honestly, I couldn't imagine playing with any guys other than my boys on the Cavaliers, especially Maurice. Doesn't private school cost a ton of money? I asked. I leaned forward to see Mom's face to gauge her reaction. I don't know how much it costs, she admitted, avoiding my anxious gaze by keeping her eyes fixed on the road. But I do think that if you got some attention there, it might mean a scholarship to college. Butch had been the first person in our family to go to college on a football scholarship, and then Brian. I knew Mom was so proud of them both, but what college was going to take a kid with grades like mine? Still, the words of that scout, "You could play at the next level," continued to echo in my mind. His affirmation, along with my brother's confidence in me, made me want to do whatever I could to succeed. Still, I was wary of leaving everything I knew, my friends, my teammates, my entire life behind. I don't want to leave Jefferson Forest, I told them. This is my team, and these are my boys. I knew Butch and Brian understood how important a team was. But Rashad, Butch said gently, it's not just about the team. This is about you. You can't play college ball with the grades you have now, no matter what any scout says. I think you need a fresh start. Because I hadn't gotten my act together the previous year when I had taken a break from football, part of me knew he was right. It was the end of November, and when the semester ended in 3 weeks, I expected my grades to look the same as they had my sophomore and freshman year. I really want to play at Jefferson Forest next year, I pleaded. I couldn't imagine spending my senior year anywhere else. Just give me a chance. No, get off the couch. No, get off the couch. Sorry. Considering my request, Butch suggested, how about this? If you get your grades up, you can stay. But if you don't get your grades up, you transfer to LCA. Trusting that they had my best interest at heart, I agreed. At that moment, I didn't care about my education. All I wanted to do was replay every second of the most amazing game of my life. Thankfully, after that awful idea about switching schools, we returned to talking about the game. I saw Mom grinning as Butch, Brian, and I reviewed my 4 touchdowns. going detail by detail like sports announcers. When Mom slowed to a stop in our driveway, we hopped out of the car to celebrate inside. As we crossed the lawn, Butch shouted, "That's how Jennings boys play." I hoped that Dad had heard him. Transition. To no one's surprise, my grades did not magically improve the second semester of my junior year, and by the time the school year ended, I knew I was headed to Lynchburg Christian Academy, where I donned the red and white Bulldog uniform. Though I'd been resistant to the idea at first, I suddenly realized that one of the prayers I prayed when I was much younger, to be closer to my brothers, was actually being answered through this transition. I never dreamed I'd have the opportunity to play for my brothers and was committed to putting in the work to make them proud. The only downside to going to LCA was that attending a private school was pricey. To make it possible for me, both Butch and Brian decided to funnel their coaching salaries into my tuition account, and my parents planned to take out a loan to pay what wasn't covered. I still can't believe my family was ready to move mountains for me like that. It taught me who our family was and how we rolled. I promised myself that if I could ever bless them in a big way, I would. But achieving the hopes we all had for my future had placed a burden squarely on me, improving my academics. Butch was the one who suggested I voluntarily repeat the junior year in order to give myself a chance to meet the academic standards required to play football. Although I wasn't thrilled about a 5th year of high school, I knew that plan would give me 2 more years to boost my abysmal GPA. It also didn't hurt that I'd have 2 more years to get the chance to play running back. Go Bulldogs. Butch and Brian had already spent 1 year at LCA working alongside the newly appointed head coach, Wayne Lance, whipping the program into shape and building a solid foundation. Prior to their arrival, the team had won only 7 games in 3 years. When we won our first game and then the second of the season, we were totally pumped. We tasted what winning felt like and wanted more. Coach Lance, Butch, Brian, and the rest of the staff worked us hard, and slowly we began to win more games. One day, while the team was working out in the gym, the coach from Liberty University swung by LCA to see the school. I knew he attended a few of our games since he was friends with Coach Lance. The two chatted for a while, and then the coach returned to where the guys and I were working. I asked him if it would be all right for me to speak with the college coach. Ever since that scout from Tennessee had encouraged me at the Brookville game, I begun to imagine playing at the next level, and I wanted to make sure I was doing everything I could to get there. "Sure, go talk to him," Coach Lance encouraged me. Outside of the brief conversation with that Tennessee scout, this was the first conversation I'd had with someone in college ball. I felt nervous as I approached him. "Hey Coach," I began, "I'm going into my senior year next year and wanted to know what you think I need to do to play college football." He looked me up and down. "You're not going to be playing." "Huh?" "Why not?" I asked, confused. I knew he'd seen a few of our games. "Because you're not good enough," he said simply. I was speechless, not sure how to respond. I walked away and returned to training. The sting of his words lingered with me for days. If you've ever been evaluated or judged on your performance, whether for a speech, an artistic performance, or for an athletic contest or academic project, the negative comments people make can stick with you. It's the same with family. It can be easy for one person's criticism of you to carry more weight than the love and affirmation of others. And sometimes the negative opinions end up being stickier than the positive ones. If you let those words have power, if you let them get traction in your mind and heart, they can derail your dreams. I had family, coaches, and even a college scout who believed in me and what I could accomplish. But the curt dismissal of that single coach rang so much louder in my head than the confidence of those I trusted most. Not forever, but for a few days. If I had allowed his grim prediction to knock me off course, I probably wouldn't be writing this book today to tell you to ignore those negative voices too. I had to choose to let his words, his opinion, roll off my back as I continued to hustle to become who I wanted to be. I'd show him and everyone else what I could do. Academics. When I wasn't working on my football game, I was working on my grades. With Butch and Brian's encouragement, I applied myself to working hard in school, but I still struggled. There was so much ground to cover, so many years of not studying or understanding the material to overcome. Sometimes the gap between where I was and where I needed to be to get to college felt like an ocean. Even getting all A's, which I was far from achieving, wouldn't have boosted my GPA to where it needed to be. I had to do more. So during the summer before my senior year, and even into the fall, I had to take several summer school classes and 9 homeschool classes on top of the regular load of courses I already had. That workload tested the limits of my commitment to realizing my dreams. If I had known what lay ahead of me when I started, I might have never begun. But the promise of playing ball for my brothers and this glimpse I'd had on going on to play at the next level kept me motivated. While my friends were going fishing and swimming that summer or working part-time jobs, I was studying. I had no life. School for me was a full-time gig from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. every single day. It was hard to focus on conquering years of material, and it was even harder knowing my friends were out having fun without me. Although I didn't feel completely alone, Mom and my brothers were always encouraging me. It was a rough season. I hadn't failed academically at Jefferson Forest only because I'd been cutting up as the class clown. My stubborn insistence on always wanting to understand why history? Am I ever going to need this? As well as my reading comprehensive deficit had both contributed to my struggles. Although I still lived with the learning deficit, I did finally have the answer to my why. Well, I knew why I was working to improve my grades, but I still wasn't convinced I needed to know the date General Lee had thrown his men under the bus. I was putting in the work so that I could achieve the goals that had been rooted in me since I was a boy. And that was enough to get me through the summer. I was finally motivated, finally taking responsibility for my life. Razzle dazzle. The seed of possibility that had been planted in my heart during the Brookfield game was beginning to take root and grow. I was working hard at my summer school classes. I'd begun to work out at the YMCA on weekends, and I'd even started to visualize playing college ball and succeeding academically. To make it to that next level, though, I'd need to be seen by someone who could help me to get there. During summer workouts, Coach Lance sent home flyers for a razzle-dazzle football game at the University of Pittsburgh. It was an amazing camp, but it cost $450 to attend. When I sheepishly handed the flyer to my mom, I honestly didn't know if it was something we could afford. But having 2 older sons who'd made it to the NFL, she understood how important these kinds of opportunities were for players to be seen by college coaches. Like she had with school and a million other things, Mom found a way to make the camp possible. And Brian attended as a coach. The 3-day camp was so fun. The focus on the camp was learning and honing skills, but it was also an opportunity to visit a college, stay in the dorms, and get players psyched to get back home and work hard. I played quarterback in the razzle-dazzle game on the 2nd day of camp. After the game, one of Pittsburgh's assistant coaches, who was coaching my team, remarked, "You can move for a big guy." He wasn't wrong. When Coach Lance talked about my playing, he'd always say, "He's got a little man moves and a big man body." That evening, I was invited to be among a group of 17 guys out of the 400 who were at the camp, who'd worked out separately the next day and performed for the coaches and scouts who'd showed up. The next morning, when they lined us up in the indoor Pittsburgh University training facility, my mind was blown. This was where the magic happened. Being chosen to be part of that elite group was a big deal, and while I knew it made some guys really nervous, the opportunity just fired me up to prove myself to the coaches and scouts at the camp. I'd been waiting for that moment since Pee Wee League. Finally, people were taking notice. One of the ways players were measured, a test that pro hopefuls also had to perform at the NFL Combine, was a 40-yard dash. Coaches were looking for players who could demonstrate a powerful burst of speed. As I watched two heats of guys run the 40 ahead of mine, I felt anxious. While big men offer a lot to the football team, speed isn't one of the gifts we are known for. Some of the leaner guys who could sprint like jackrabbits, and I took a deep breath to calm my nerves. I lined up with the third group of guys to run the 40. When the gun went off, I started a bit slower than the other players, but ended up finishing strong. As I caught my breath after the run, I noticed the coaches and scouts looking at their stopwatches and talking to each other. "Hey, Rashad," one of them yelled, "do it again." That's weird. Why do they want me to do it again? Walking back to the starting line, I lined up and waited for the gun. I exploded from the line and powered through to the finish, gulping in deep breaths of air. I watched the group of men comparing stopwatches. One asked, "How much do you weigh?" 265, I answered. Another exclaimed, "No way." The Pittsburgh assistant coach led us over to a scale, and these guys gathered around as I stood on the scale. It read 265.8 pounds. Even though, as a rule, football players need to be big and fast, it's still a rare combo to find those who are both. More often, a player will be one or the other. "Man," the coach from Pitt explained, "I want to talk to your coach." I could read the faces of the coaches and scouts and knew that they were impressed by my speed. Although I didn't know exactly what would come of it, and despite the fact that no one was being recruited at the camp, it felt great to be noticed. Private high schools and small towns don't get a lot of attention from coaches and scouts. Without the opportunity to have gone to this camp that Mom made possible with her hard work and penny pinching, these guys never would have known about me. At the end of camp, before we loaded back onto the bus to go home, the head coach from Pittsburgh, who only come for the last day of camp, pulled me aside. "Rashad," he said, "we haven't seen your tape yet, but we want to offer you a full scholarship if you come to Pitt." I was dumbfounded, and also glad he hadn't asked about my grades. Barely able to speak, I was finally able to spit out 2 words: "Thank you." When I got on the bus, I poured out the whole story to Brian. I called Butch to inform him of the news. Amazed, he told me that a coach making an offer without ever seeing film from a game just doesn't happen. My dreams were coming true. I was going to play college ball. Discipline. Because others saw something in me worth investing in, something clicked inside of me, and I started investing in myself. I believed in my dream for a long time, but that belief had endured more than enough attacks from critics like my dad, some of my coaches, and sometimes even other guys on the team. But now I had something to hold on to, a future with college and football. 2 things that almost no one but me would have believed possible. One Saturday morning, after returning from camp, I woke up, put my shorts and t-shirt on, and laced up my running shoes. After stretching, I walked out of the front door and jogged to the street. Heading back out of our neighborhood on Cimarron Road, I started running toward the YMCA, which was about 3.5 miles away. I worked out there all day, and when I was done, I ran back home. From that day on, I started running everywhere I went. Running alone was good for me because it meant I wasn't comparing myself to others. It was like playing an individual sport for the first time, which meant I needed to be even more disciplined than when I had a team or coach to cheer or goad me on. While I felt like I was going to die one day, gradually I began to get stronger. I'd run until I couldn't run anymore. I began to get stronger. I run until I couldn't run anymore. And then I pull out my inhaler out of my shorts and use it to open my airway. Although my doctors had advised against strenuous activity, I could sense improvement and felt like my lungs were getting stronger. Around that time, I also decided it was time to get serious about nutrition. I had always known that if I wanted to shed pounds, I should change my diet and exercise, but for some reason, I just hadn't done it. So one day I decided to conduct a food experiment. On the kitchen counter, I set out a McDonald's burger and fries that I had brought home and put in the fridge the night before. I also poured a glass of milk and laid out one slice of cheese. This was one of my favorite dinners when out with my friends, was meal number 1. Beside it, I laid out meal number 2, a head of lettuce, a lean chicken breast, a banana, and a glass of water. My mom, a self-professed neat freak, was horrified. "Boy, if you don't clean up that mess." "Trust me, Mom," I told her. "I'm doing an experiment. I'm going to leave them out for 3 days and see what happens." Though she hated messes and also hated to waste food, Mom loved me. So she let me keep my little mad science experiment. After 3 days, I reviewed the results. The burger had thickened and was hard as a rock. The milk stunk. I put meal number 1 in a bowl and pushed it toward the wall. Then I surveyed meal number 2. The chicken was a little stiffer than it had been 3 days earlier, but everything else seemed fine. I placed meal number 2 in a separate bowl, stirred it up, and left it on the counter. As time passed, I could see that the second meal eventually broke down and began to decay, but without the nasty smells and rot I observed in the first one. From that day on, I aimed to only eat foods that would deteriorate naturally when left alone. I cut out fast foods and committed to making healthy choices. A typical meal for me included a chicken breast, rice, broccoli, and a salad. As a result of my new discipline, both with exercises and eating right, I lost 35 pounds and improved my 40-yard dash time by 0.2 of a second. I was finally getting my act together. I was working hard to complete my summer school classes. I was working out. I begun to eat right. I was determined to achieve my dream, and I was finally taking the steps I needed to take to make it a reality. With determination and hard work, I made progress academically and physically. When you set your mind to achieve your goals, you don't have to make all the changes at once. I put the effort on academics, then physical training, then diet. By setting your mind to meet smaller goals, you'll eventually reach the big ones. And I can't stress enough the importance of a strong support system. People in your corner who will encourage you, believe in you, and even sacrifice for you are precious gifts. When I argued with Butch and Brian about switching schools from Jefferson Forest, I had no idea what my first year at Lynchburg Christian would bring. But if I could have seen where I would have ended up as I began my senior year, I would have saved my breath. I was finally on my way to success, and nothing could stop me. Chapter 9.